The room was already full when I walked in. Not full of people, full of weight, the kind that settles into expensive furniture and climate-controlled air and the particular silence of men who have never once had to raise their voices to get what they want. I was the only person in the room who had flown economy. I knew it the moment I sat down, not because anyone said anything, but because of the way they didn't. The slight pause before the greeting, the careful positioning of eye contact that acknowledged me without fully landing on me. The kind of welcome that says you are here because you were invited, rather than you are here because you belong. I smoothed my jacket, opened my notepad, and smiled the smile I had spent 7 years perfecting. Warm enough to disarm, composed enough to be underestimated. Being underestimated, then I had learned, was its own kind of power. What nobody in that room understood yet was that I had been reading it from the moment I walked through the door. The man at the head of the table spoke the most, controlled the agenda, referenced numbers with the casual fluency of someone who had never once had to memorize them, because they had always simply been his. Everyone except the man in the corner who hadn't spoken once. Everyone followed his rhythm. He sat slightly apart from the others, not aggressively, not timidly, just with the natural ease of someone who understood that proximity to the center of a room and actual power within it were two entirely different things. He hadn't checked his phone, hadn't shuffled papers, hadn't performed the small social mathematics that everyone else was quietly doing. He was simply watching, and at some point during the first 10 minutes I realized he wasn't watching the room. He was watching me. Hold on, we have to pause right here. Have you ever loved someone and still felt unsafe around their family? Comment me too if you relate. Subscribe, because the first betrayal is closer than you think. And tell us where you are watching from. I had come to Seoul believing I understood how power worked. I understood institutions. I understood boards and committees and the careful architecture of influence dressed as generosity. I had spent 7 years inside systems built by people with more money than accountability, and I had learned to move through them without becoming one of them. What I had not accounted for, what none of my preparation, my 4.0 GPA, my 3-week speech rehearsal, or my sensible flats had prepared me for, was a man who held more power than anyone else in the building and had chosen, deliberately and without explanation, to arrive on a scooter. I got the email at 6:43 a.m., not a phone call, not a meeting request. An email, subject line blank, sent from the fund's board address, CC'd to 3 people whose names I had never seen before. The body contained 4 sentences. The last one told me my access to the Cornerstone Fund accounts had been suspended pending an internal review. 7 years. 4 sentences. I was still in my hotel robe, standing barefoot on cold marble in Seoul, South Korea, holding my phone with both hands like it might say something different if I waited long enough. That's when the knock came. 3 quiet knocks. Not urgent, not aggressive. The kind of knock that belongs to someone who already knows you're awake. I opened the door and he was standing there. Yoon Dong-hyun, in a plain gray hoodie and dark jeans, holding 2 paper cups of coffee like we had done this before. No explanation. No apology for the hour. Just those steady dark eyes reading my face the way you read a page you already know is going to hurt. "You saw the email," he said. It wasn't a question. I stepped back. He came in. He set the coffee on the desk, looked at the screen still glowing with those 4 sentences, and said nothing for a long moment. "This started before you arrived in Seoul," he said quietly. "Someone wanted you discredited before you could speak tonight." I should have asked how he knew. I should have told him to leave. Instead, I thought about something I hadn't thought about in years. A photograph I found in my mother's closet when I was 17. 2 women in a hospital corridor. 1 Korean, 1 Black American. My mother told me it was nobody important. She said that too quickly. I never forgot how quickly she said it. Danielle Dawson came to Seoul to accept an award. Now her career is on the line, and the man at her door knows more than he should. If you are watching this for the first time, subscribe right now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because this story, it is just getting started. He told me part of the truth. Just part. Dong-hyun sat across from me in that hotel room while Seoul woke up outside the window, and he explained, carefully, the way you explain something to a person you are still deciding how much to trust, that the Cornerstone Funds Board had received an anonymous tip 2 days before the gala. The tip claimed Danielle Dawson had a personal financial connection to the Yoon family that made her nomination for the Crane Medallion a conflict of interest. He said the tip was fabricated. He said it with complete calm, which was either the most reassuring thing I had ever heard or the most dangerous. "Who sent it?" I asked. He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. "Someone on the gala committee with access to the nomination files." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." That was the moment I understood something about Yoon Dong-hyun that no briefing packet would ever tell me. He would not lie to me. But he would leave doors closed until he decided you were ready to walk through them. I couldn't decide if that was protection or control. What I knew was this. 36 hours ago, I had watched this man get turned away from a building his family owned. He had not flinched. He had not corrected the woman dismissing him. He had simply stood there with that infuriating stillness, like a man who understood that the truth would arrange itself correctly if you gave it enough time. I was starting to understand why that stillness unsettled me. "The person who sent the tip," I said slowly. "Do they know about my mother's scholarship?" Something shifted in his expression, just slightly, just enough. "They know about the document," he said. "They don't know what it means yet. Yet." That single word sat between us like a lit match. Because somewhere in this building, someone was building a case against me using a 30-year-old secret I had only learned about 12 hours ago. And the man sitting across from me had known about it for months. Whose side is Dong-hyun really on? Drop your answer in the comments, and make sure you are subscribed because the next installment is where everything hidden starts coming to the surface. He found me at 9 p.m. in the East Corridor, pretending to read a wall plaque I had already read twice. "Come with me," Dong-hyun said. No explanation, no destination offered. I followed him anyway. That probably tells you everything about where my head was. He led me through a narrow passage behind the main library, stopped at a shelf of leather-bound ledgers, and pressed one specific spine. Third from the left, second shelf. The wall moved, not dramatically. Just a quiet, practiced click, and then a room appeared that smelled like cedar and old paper, and something that felt, strangely, like intention. The room was small, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a single reading lamp, a wooden table worn smooth by decades of careful hands. "My grandmother spent every Tuesday evening in here," he said. "Alone. Nobody questioned it because she was the kind of woman nobody questioned." I looked at the rows of ledgers, names, dates, amounts, column after column of quiet transactions that had never made a press release. "She funded people," I said. "She protected them," he corrected. "There is a difference." He said it like he needed me to understand which one his grandmother had chosen and why that choice had cost her something. And I turned to ask him what exactly it had cost. And he was closer than I expected. Not inappropriately close. Just close enough that I could see the tiredness he kept out of his voice. 4 years of anonymous work. A family that had pulled him back not out of love, but out of necessity. A brother who had vanished rather than stay and fight. "Why did you really come back?" I asked. He was quiet long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. "Because someone had to," he said finally. "And because I found out you were coming." I should have asked what that meant. Instead, I looked back at the ledgers, and my eye caught one thing before he gently turned the page. A surname, handwritten in faded ink inside the front cover of the closest volume. Dawson. My hands went still. Dong-hyun. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "How long have you known my name?" He closed the ledger carefully. "Long enough," he said, "to know this room was waiting for you too. What exactly is written in that ledger? And how deeply is Danielle's family already tied to this one?" The next page turns, and the walls of this private world are about to become very public. The email arrived at 5:17 a.m. subject line, FW, CFC, archive, chrysanthemum protocol/roots. My assistant in Chicago had forwarded it without comment, which meant she didn't understand what she was sending. I read it 4 times before my brain accepted what my eyes were showing me. A scanned document. 1991. A Korean-American legal firm. Dissolved in 2003. A confidential scholarship sponsorship agreement between an anonymous Korean donor and the predecessor organization of my own cornerstone fund. When the recipient of the scholarship was a young Black American woman studying nursing in New York. Her name was Patricia Dawson. My mother. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time without moving. The city outside was doing its usual morning things. Distant traffic, a delivery truck reversing, a bird that didn't know it was performing for someone coming apart quietly in a 4th-floor room. None of it reached me. What reached me was a handwritten clause in the document's margin, initialed by both parties, that read, "In the event that the sponsoring family requires verification of lineage or legacy connection in the next generation, the recipient's family retains the right and responsibility to bear witness." Bear witness to what? I called my mother at 6 a.m. her time. She answered on the 2nd ring. That detail alone told me everything. She had been awake, waiting, already carrying the weight of a conversation she had rehearsed and postponed for years. "Mama," I said carefully, "did someone pay for your college?" The silence that followed was not the silence of a woman who didn't know the answer. It was the silence of a woman choosing her first word with the care of someone who understands that first words set the shape of everything that follows. "Baby," she said, "I was going to tell you when the time was right." When was the time going to be right? She exhaled, soft, tired, and something underneath that I recognized as relief. The relief of a secret that has finally gotten too heavy to carry alone. "I suppose," she said quietly, "it's right now." Outside my hotel window, the Yoon Grand Pavilion caught the early light and threw it back in clean, cold lines. The building that hosted the award, the family that funded my mother's future, and a man who already knew my name. How much of my life was built on a foundation I never saw? Mama tells the whole truth next, and nothing will be the same after it. There was a man outside my hotel room door at 7 a.m. Not Dong-hyun, someone older, formal, with the particular stillness of a person paid to deliver information without reacting to it. He wore a dark suit and carried a slim leather portfolio pressed flat against his side like it contained something that shouldn't move. "Miss Dawson." His English was precise, unhurried. "My name is Attorney Lim. I represent the Yoon family estate, and I have been asked to speak with you before the gala proceedings begin." I let him in because refusing felt like the wrong kind of courage. He sat, opened the portfolio, placed a single document on the table between us. Not the 1991 scholarship agreement I had found in my email, but something older, handwritten, sealed at the bottom with a wax impression of a crane mid-flight. "Are you aware," he said, "that your grandmother and the late Yoon Soo-jin made a formal agreement in New York in 1988? "I'm becoming aware," I said carefully. "Are you aware of what that agreement required of your family in return?" I said nothing, because my mother, on the phone an hour ago, had told me about the scholarship, about the anonymous donor, about the funding, about the years of quiet gratitude she had carried like something sacred. But she had stopped before the end. She had said, "There is one more piece, baby, and I need you to hear it from the right person." Attorney Lim looked at me with the patience of someone who had held this appointment for a very long time. "Your grandmother made a promise," he said. "Not financial, not legal, personal." He tapped the wax seal. "She promised that if the Yoon family ever lost its way, if the mission the matriarch built ever came under threat, a Dawson woman would come back and stand in the room where it started." The room where it started. The hidden library, the cedar smell, the ledgers. I had already been in that room. Did Dong-hyun know about this promise? I asked. Attorney Lim closed the portfolio with the same care you'd use closing something that had waited long enough. He has known since his grandmother's letter was unsealed, he said. 18 months ago. 18 months. Long before my nomination. Long before my name appeared on any gala list. My chair felt very far from the floor. The promise goes deeper than a scholarship. Danielle's grandmother made a vow that crossed an ocean and outlived everyone who made it, and Dong-hyun has been carrying it for 18 months without saying a word. If you leave now, you will never know what the vow actually required. Subscribe and tell us in the comments. Do you trust him? Because Danielle is not sure she does. By 9 a.m., the pavilion was performing. That is the only word for it. Every surface polished, every staff member positioned, every floral arrangement engineered to suggest effortless grace. The formal welcome breakfast for gala delegates was held in the pavilion's blue terrace, a long room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden where white stones had been raked into deliberate patterns since before sunrise. I arrived 3 minutes late. Every seat at the long table turned toward me at once. Every seat except one. Han Seok-jun, the Yoon Group's chief financial officer, was already standing, already moving toward me with a warmth so practiced it had its own choreography. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that arrives before the person wearing it has actually decided to mean it. "Miss Dawson." He took my hand in both of his. "The Cornerstone Fund's reputation precedes you beautifully. I have followed your work for years." "Thank you," I said. Because what else do you say to a man who sounds like admiration but feels like assessment? He walked me personally to my seat, third from the head of the table, positioned between a Swiss delegate and an empty chair that bore a small folded card with Dong-hyun's name. Dong-hyun arrived 4 minutes later. He saw Han standing behind my chair. Something crossed his face. Not anger, not alarm, but the particular focus of a man recalibrating a situation he had already mapped 3 moves ahead. Han moved away smoothly, as if he had simply been welcoming a guest and nothing more. But as the breakfast began and conversation filled the room, a young staff member, early 20s, nervous hands, a pavilion lanyard identifying her as archive services, slipped a folded note beneath the edge of my bread plate without making eye contact. I opened it under the table. 4 words and a room number. Jae-won wants to talk. Okay, now it is getting heavy. His family wants control. Her heart wants peace. If you were her, would you stay quiet or speak up? Comment, quiet or speak. Like this video, subscribe, because her next choice decides her future. I looked up. The staff member was already gone. Han was laughing at something the Swiss delegate had said. Dong-hyun was watching me from 3 seats away with an expression that told me he had not sent the note, which meant someone else in this building knew the missing heir's location. And they had chosen to tell me first. The CFO knows more than he is showing. The missing heir is closer than anyone admitted, and someone just handed Danielle the most dangerous invitation in the building. The door opens next, and what is behind it changes everything. Someone in this building was lying. I knew it the way you know a room has been searched. Everything looks right, but nothing feels undisturbed. The note had directed me to a service corridor on the pavilion's lower level, behind the archive room, past a door marked with a small yellow maintenance tag that was clearly not maintenance. I pushed it open at exactly 10 a.m. and found a man sitting in a plain chair under a single overhead light, drinking barley tea from a paper cup like he had nowhere more important to be. He looked like Dong-hyun the way a rough draft looks like a finished letter. The same structure, different weight. "You're Jae-won," I said. "Sit down, Miss Dawson." His English was slower than his brother's, more deliberate. We have limited time and 3 things I need you to know." He set the paper cup down and looked at me steadily. "First," he said, "the CFO, Han Seok-jun, has been redirecting funds from my grandmother's private philanthropic accounts for 6 years. I have the bank transfer records to prove it." He slid a document across the table. A single printed ledger page, A highlighted line showing a transfer dated March 2019. The destination institution clearly a private holdings company registered in a name I didn't recognize. Second, he said, my disappearance was voluntary. I left to build the evidence package from outside the family's legal reach. I am not a victim. I am a strategy. And third? I asked. Something shifted behind his eyes. Third, he said quietly. My brother chose to come back to this family for you, not for the board. Not for the name. He found my grandmother's letter 14 months ago, read your family's name inside it, and spent the next 8 months quietly ensuring your Cornerstone Fund nomination reached the right committee. I sat with that for a moment. 2 of those statements felt like solid ground. One felt like it had been constructed to feel that way. I just didn't know which one yet. What I did know, because I had found it folded inside the ledger page when Jaewon wasn't watching, was a printed screenshot of a private assistant's calendar. 1 appointment, 4 months ago. Location, Chicago. Name listed simply as Sunbird, a nickname I had never heard, attached to a meeting I had never been told about. Sunbird. I looked up. Jaewon's expression told me he had meant for me to find it. 3 statements, 2 truths, 1 lie. And a nickname that connects Danielle to a meeting she never knew happened. Drop in the comments, which statement do you think is the lie? Like this video and subscribe, because the answer lands hard. I found Dong-hyun on the East Terrace at noon. Jacket off, sleeves pushed up, both hands resting on the stone railing, looking at Seoul the way you look at something you love and are not sure you can keep. I walked up beside him and placed the calendar screenshot on the railing between us without a word. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Chicago, I said. 4 months ago. Sunbird. That's me, isn't it? He didn't deny it. That was the thing about him. He would hold a door closed, but he would not pretend the door wasn't there. I came to see your work, he said. Not you specifically. I attended the Cornerstone Fund's community presentation at the public library on West Madison. I sat in the back. I left before it ended. Why? Because I needed to know if the fund was real, he said, or if it had become something my family's money had shaped without your knowledge. He paused. It was real. Completely, independently real. You built something my grandmother would have recognized immediately. And there it was, the hidden motive his brother had handed me like a key, and I was only now finding the lock. Dong-hyun had not manipulated my nomination. He had verified that I deserved it before he let it move forward. The distinction was significant. It did not fully settle everything. Your brother told me you came back for me, I said. That the board and the name were secondary. He turned from the railing and looked at me directly. Jaewon tends to make things poetic when the plain version serves him better. What's the plain version? I came back because the family needed saving, and I was the one left who could do it. A beat. And because your name was in my grandmother's letter, and I needed to understand what that meant before you arrived, and I lost the chance to be honest about it. Then his phone vibrated on the railing. He glanced at it once. His expression shifted, not panic, but the specific alertness of a man receiving news he had prepared for but still hoped wouldn't arrive. What is it? I asked. He looked at me steadily. Han knows you met with Jaewon this morning. He's called an emergency board session. A pause. And he's named you as a person of interest in the fund irregularities. They just turned Danielle into the suspect. Now she has to decide, fight from inside the family circle, or walk away before it closes around her completely. What would you do? Tell us below. The truth stops being quiet next. The photograph loaded slowly, the way important things always do. A hospital corridor. 1988. 2 women, standing close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching. 1 Korean, 1 Black American, both of them young, both of them laughing at something the camera had arrived too late to catch. The kind of laugh that means safety, the kind that means I trust you completely and I am not performing it. My grandmother was on the left. I recognized her cheekbones before I recognized her face. The same structure my mother carried. The same structure I see in the mirror every morning without thinking about it. She was maybe 26 in the photograph. She looked like someone who had no idea she was making history. The woman beside her had to be Yoon Soo-jin, the matriarch, Dong-hyun's grandmother. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile, more like a decision. Like a woman choosing, in real time, to remember this moment permanently. I was still holding my laptop when the door knocked. Dong-hyun stood in the doorway. No coffee this time, just him, hands in his pockets, reading my face the way he always did, quietly, without making it feel like an examination. "You found the folder," he said. "How long has your family had this photograph? Since she passed?" He leaned against the door frame but didn't come in. The distance felt deliberate, like he was giving me the room, letting me own the space while I processed. She kept it in a cedar box with the scholarship documents and 3 letters she never sent. "Letters to who?" "One to your grandmother, one to your mother." He paused. "One to you." The floor felt briefly uncertain beneath me. "She wrote a letter to me," I said. "Before I was born. Before she knew your name," he said. "She addressed it, to the daughter of the daughter when the time arrives." I closed the laptop. I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't shaking. "Dong-hyun." My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "What did the letter say?" He was quiet for a long moment. Not evasive. "Okay, just careful. The way you are careful with something that belongs to someone else, and you have been trusted to deliver intact. That you would arrive when the family needed a witness most," he said. "And that the witness would need the family just as much." He looked at me gently. She was not wrong about either part. A letter written before Danielle was born. A photograph that crossed 30 years to find her. And a man standing in a doorway who has been carrying both longer than she has known his name. Are you feeling this story? Subscribe right now and drop a comment, because everything Danielle has been holding is about to break the surface. I rewrote the speech at 2 a.m., not edited, rewrote, first word to last. Nya sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed with the original printed version face down on the nightstand because I couldn't look at it anymore. That speech had been written by a woman who came to Seoul to accept an award and go home. She had prepared statistics, anecdotes, 3 carefully structured paragraphs about the Cornerstone Fund's 7-year impact, and a closing line she had practiced in the mirror until it stopped sounding rehearsed. That woman felt very far away now. What I wrote instead was quieter and more honest and considerably more dangerous. I wrote about 2 grandmothers in a hospital corridor, about a promise that didn't need a contract to hold, about what it costs to do good work in silence, and what it means when the silence finally gets to speak. I didn't mention Dong-hyun. I didn't mention the document or the hidden room or the USB drive Jae-won had placed in my hand with the gravity of someone passing a torch. But everything I wrote was shaped by all of it. The way water is shaped by the ground it moves through, even when you can't see the ground. At 3 a.m., someone slid paper under my door. A single sheet, folded once. His handwriting, careful, unhurried. The letters slightly more formal than his spoken English, like a man who had learned to write in a language he wanted to get exactly right. It was his grandmother's letter. A photocopy, but complete. To the daughter of the daughter, when the time arrives. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it inside my diary between pages 41 and 42, which happened to be the entry where I had first written his name. I did not think that was an accident. At 4 a.m., my phone lit up with a message from my assistant in Chicago. The board members who had suspended my account access had received a formal legal response from an unnamed Seoul-based law firm. My access had been reinstated. No explanation given. I knew without asking who had made that call. The problem was that by 6 a.m. a new message had arrived. This one from an unknown number. 4 words that made my rewritten speech suddenly feel like the least complicated thing on this table. Han knows about Jaewon. I set the phone down, picked up my speech, read the first line of what I had written at 2 a.m. The gala opens in 14 hours. Han has 4 words that could end everything before the first course is served, and Danielle is holding a speech that was never supposed to exist. And the pavilion fills up next, and every secret in it comes dressed for the occasion. The pavilion transformed overnight into something that felt less like a venue and more like a verdict. White orchids lined every surface in long, deliberate rows. Paper cranes hung from the vaulted ceiling on invisible thread, turning slowly in the climate-controlled air like 1,000 small decisions suspended mid-flight. The roots and wings theme had been rendered so precisely that it felt less like decoration and more like an argument. This family understands legacy, the room insisted. This family honors what it was built on. I walked in holding that argument at arm's length. Table 7 stopped me completely. Centered in the table arrangement, framed in simple white wood, was a photograph of my mother. Young, bright-eyed, standing outside a university building in a winter coat 2 sizes too large, holding a textbook against her chest like a shield and a prize at the same time. She was maybe 19. She had no idea anyone was building a future around her. I was still holding the frame when Chairman Yoon Byung-chul appeared at my left shoulder. Not Dong-hyun, his father. The chairman was a tall man with the specific gravity of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to fill a room. He looked at the photograph in my hands, then at me, with an expression that contained several things at once: recognition, calculation, and something that might have been guilt if it had been allowed to finish forming. "Your presence here honors my mother's memory," he said. "With respect, Chairman Yoon," I said carefully. "I didn't come here to honor a memory. I came here to accept an award my fund earned independently." A pause. His expression adjusted almost imperceptibly. "Of course," he said, then quieter. "My son tells me you are a woman who says exactly what she means." "I try to be." He nodded once, not warmly, but with the particular respect of a man who has spent his life surrounded by people who don't. Then he moved away, and Dong-hyun appeared in the space his father had left, close enough that I could speak without being overheard. "He just told me," Dong-hyun said quietly, "that the board wants the USB drive suppressed until after the ceremony." I looked at the paper cranes turning slowly overhead. "And what do you want?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "I want you to decide. I did not expect that, did you? If you were offered a second chance, but it came with a dirty deal. AJ, would you take it? Comment, take, or refuse. Subscribe, because the next installment shows what he was hiding behind that smile." Han Seok-jun took the podium at 7:45 p.m. like a man who had earned it, which was precisely the problem. He stood in front of 500 people in a room his manipulation had helped fund, preparing to deliver a tribute to a woman whose life's work he had spent 6 years quietly dismantling. And he did it with the composed warmth of someone who had never once lost sleep over the distance between who he appeared to be and who he actually was. I was seated 4 tables back. The USB drive was in my jacket pocket. The oversight committee table was 30 feet to my left. Dong-hyun was watching me from the far edge of the room. "Nana, sir." We had not spoken since I made the decision backstage 20 minutes earlier. The decision he had placed entirely in my hands, which I understood now was itself a form of trust so complete it almost felt like pressure. Han began speaking. He described Yoon Soo-jin as a woman of quiet grace and traditional generosity. He used the word legacy 4 times in the first 90 seconds. He told a story about the matriarch presenting him personally with a commendation for his stewardship of the family's philanthropic vision, a story I now knew, from the grandmother's letter, was fabricated from beginning to end. That was the moment I stood up, not loudly, not dramatically. I simply rose from my seat, walked the 30 feet to the oversight committee table, and placed the USB drive in front of the committee chair without a word. The committee chair looked at it, looked at me, looked at the credentials card I placed beside it, Jaewon's formal authorization, signed and notarized, granting me the right to submit the evidence package on the family's behalf. She picked up the drive. Han was still speaking. He didn't know yet. The room didn't know yet. Dong-hyun across the room watched me return to my seat with an expression that was not relief, not pride, but something more honest than both. The look of a man watching someone choose correctly when choosing incorrectly would have been so much easier. Then his phone lit up on the table beside him. He read it once, looked up at me, mouthed 2 words I could read clearly from 4 tables away. He knows. Danielle just handed over everything. The room does not know it yet. Han does not know it yet. But the clock is already running, and 4 minutes is about to change every single thing. They called my name at 9 p.m. I walked to the podium the way you walk toward something you cannot take back. 1 foot, then the other. The room expanding around me as I moved through it. 500 faces turning in my direction with the patient expectation of people who believed they already knew what I was about to say. I had 4 minutes. I had timed it exactly. The speech I had prepared 3 weeks ago was in my left jacket pocket. The speech I had rewritten at 2 a.m. was in my right. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the room, and made the decision I had been circling since the moment I arrived in Seoul. I reached into my right pocket. "The woman this award is named after," I began, when believed that real generosity has no audience. The room was very quiet. She was right about that. She was right about most things from what I've learned this week. I paused, not for effect, but because the next sentence needed to be exact. But I've also learned that sometimes silence stops being protection and starts being something else. Sometimes silence becomes the wall that hides the damage. I did not look at Han Seok-jun. I didn't need to. My grandmother was a nurse in New York in 1988. She cared for a woman she had never met, from a country she had never visited, during a crisis that could have ended very differently. She didn't do it for recognition. She didn't do it for connection or future benefit or any reason that could be documented in a ledger. I felt my voice steady itself. She did it because the woman needed care and my grandmother was in the room. I heard the quality of the silence change. The Cornerstone Fund exists because that moment was honored forward, because a promise made between 2 women in a hospital corridor was treated as something real and binding across 30 years and 2 generations. I looked at the crane medallion sitting on the presentation table. I accept this award on behalf of every quiet promise that was kept when it would have been easier to forget it. 4 minutes. Exactly. 3 committee members were visibly emotional. The room held its applause for just a beat longer than ceremony required, the extra second that means something landed genuinely. I walked back to my seat. I did not look at Dong-hyun until I sat down. When I did, he was the only person in the room who was not clapping. He was simply watching me with dark, steady eyes and an expression that had no performance in it whatsoever. Just recognition, pure and uncomplicated. That part hurt, but it also taught something. What would you do differently if you were in her shoes? Comment 1 thing you would change. Subscribe, because her next move is the boldest one yet. Danielle just told the truth in a room full of people who were not ready for it. She chose the speech that cost more. Was it the right call, or did she just hand Han exactly what he needed to fight back? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe if you have not yet, and stay right here. Because what is waiting at her seat when she sits back down changes everything. The velvet box was small and dark blue and sitting beside my water glass like it had always been there. I noticed it before I fully sat down, the way you notice something that shouldn't exist in a space you've been watching carefully. I looked left and right, without making it obvious. The Swiss delegate beside me was still applauding. The committee chair was shaking hands at the front of the room. Nobody was watching my table with the specific attention of someone who had just placed something on it. I opened the box. A necklace, white jade, shaped into a crane mid-flight, hung on a fine gold chain. On the back, engraved in characters I'd learned to recognize by now, the Yoon family motto, "What is buried will rise." Underneath the box was a note, his handwriting. I would know it anywhere now. My grandmother wanted you to have this. It belonged to the woman who inspired her mission. I think it belongs back in your family now. DH. And then, below that, in slightly different pressure, added separately after the first lines had already dried, she also wrote in her final letter that the Dawson woman, when she came, would know what to do with the family when the family forgot what it was for. I spent 18 months wondering if that was too much to ask of a stranger. I don't think you're a stranger anymore. I folded the note, placed it carefully inside my jacket pocket, against my chest, next to nothing because nothing else needed to be there. The awards ceremony continued around me. Han Seok-jun had not retaken the podium. I scanned the room once and found his seat at the head table empty, a precise "Awa Sananian, Buen," telling absence that sent a quiet current through the staff members who noticed it. Dong-hyun found me at the edge of the room an hour later, when the formal proceedings had softened into conversation and music. We walked out through the same courtyard where I had told him to move his scooter 4 days ago. He didn't bring it up. I didn't either. We walked side by side in the cool Seoul night and talked for 2 hours about grandmothers and promises and what it means to inherit something you never asked for, but cannot put down. He did not hold my hand. He did not make declarations. At the end of the courtyard, he stopped walking and looked at me with that same expression from the podium, the one with no performance in it. "I'll be in Chicago in 3 weeks, he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said. I did not explain how I knew. He did not ask. The necklace is back where it belongs. The CFO's chair is empty, and a man who rode a scooter through Seoul just told Danielle he is crossing an ocean in 3 weeks. 1 page left, and the question was never whether they would find each other. The question is what they will both have to give up to stay. The headline hit at 6 a.m., not a rumor, not a whispered allegation in a back corridor. A full article, published by a Seoul business outlet with a readership of 4 million, carrying a photograph of me entering the pavilion's lower level the morning I met Jae-won. Time-stamped, captioned, and framed with the kind of careful language that says we are not accusing anyone while accusing someone completely. American Fund Director's secret meeting with missing Yoon heir raises conflict questions. My phone had 17 notifications before I finished reading the title. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in yesterday's clothes, the jade crane necklace still in my hand from the night before, and I made myself read every word of the article slowly. Not because I wanted to, because you do not make good decisions from panic, and panic was the only other option available. The article named me. It named Jae-won. It did not name Han Seok-jun once. My assistant called at 6:09 a.m. "Danielle, the board is meeting in 2 hours. 3 donors have already sent emails. Tell them I'll call this afternoon," I said. "They want a statement before noon. Tell them I'll call this afternoon." I hung up, looked at the necklace, looked at the window where Seoul was doing its indifferent morning routine, completely unbothered by any of this. My phone lit up again. Dong-hyun this time. 4 words. "Don't issue anything yet." Then, 10 seconds later, a second message. "I'm coming to you." I set the phone face down on the bed and looked at the article photograph one more time. Me, walking through a door, caught in a moment that looked exactly wrong from exactly the right angle. Outside, I looked composed. Inside, everything was moving very fast. Do not leave yet. The next installment starts where this one ends. Comment. Next. If you want part 2 today, subscribe and like, because the next twist is already loading. Someone fed that photograph to the press before the gala even ended. Han is gone, but his moves are still landing. And Dong-hyun is on his way, which means whatever comes next, they are facing it together, or losing everything separately. Subscribe right now. Because in the next installment, reputations do not bend, they break.